Chances are, if you've seen Meryl Streep starrer Mamma Mia, it's probably one of your favorite films. Chances are, if you've seen the Meryl Streep starrer The Iron Lady, you're aware that she won an Oscar for that performance. What are the chances that today on this channel, I'm going to be talking to the director of both those films? 100%. Phyllida Lloyd is amazing. Her new film Herself is out on Amazon Prime Video, and I got a chance to sit down with her and chat. We began by her complimenting me on my women telling women's story sweatshirt. So here we go. This is a very serious interview, you guys, all right? Feel free to make fun of my accent to it.
Thank you. I make these myself.
Wow. That's wonderful.
Yes.
Okay, I've got to get one. Is there a website?
Yes, there is. I will send your team a link.
Okay, great.
For the sweatshirt. Oh, I'm so glad. I watched Herself. One look at the credits of the film as it ends will tell you just how many women are involved in making this film with you, as not just actors and, you know, Claire Dunn as a writer and the lead actor of the film, but also a lot of your heads of departments are women. Music, edit, production. Do you think that makes it easier for you to tell women's stories with more empathy than you bring yourself?
Gosh, that's a very good question. I think that we set out to have a 50-50 gender split on the film unit, which I know may not sound much, but it is a culture where certain departments are so dominated by men that it's very hard to break that tradition. I think unquestionably having more women as heads of department, I think alters the culture. And I think that we were able to create a very collaborative, because it's an independent film as well, there's a sense of investment from everybody. There's that word in the film, a mehel, which is the Irish word for when, you know, a community helps each other do something. This film crew was a little bit like a mehel. It's as if Claire wants to get her film made in Ireland, or Claire and Phyllida want to make their film, and we're going to come together and help them. The fact we happen to be paid to do it is almost by the by, because it's a low budget film, so hardly people aren't getting paid that much anyway. There was a real investment beyond just, oh, it's another day, another dollar. And I think that's to do with it being a small unit. And the subject, I think people felt, you know, this story needs to be told.
It's land, Sandra, going to waste. Use it. Build a house for you and your girls.
Speaking of mehel, that Irish word that we heard and I learned about, that it means community and a team coming together to help each other out. So despite being a film set in Ireland, the story is very global. It's very real for women across the world. Especially in this pandemic lockdown, we've heard really unfortunate incidents of domestic violence and abuse, and women who've come forward and shared their story. Was this a conscious attempt on your part and Claire's part to make this story unique to Sandra, but also a globally relatable
Yeah.
story?
I mean, I think we wanted to make it very, very particular in its details of Dublin. So even the difference between, you'd think, well, Ireland and England, what's the difference? But actually, even in courtroom procedure and every detail. So it was very carefully researched to feel completely authentic. You know, the community that came together, the diversity in that community of Russians and Brazilians and people from the Cameroon and Africa. This was all very, very authentic to the city now. But I think what we were trying to do was, by making it so specific, that would make it more universal. And we were conscious all the time. It's not just Dublin where there's not enough social housing, there isn't enough support for women of domestic abuse. Women are shamed when they take their husbands to court for having abused them. You know, these are universal problems. And I think, of course, we didn't know, we finished the film just before the pandemic hit. We had no idea that the themes of isolation and community are really the themes of the pandemic, you know, and the fact that, as you say, there are thousands of women all over the world who are in lockdown in situations of domestic abuse, and maybe even lockdown has has kind of incubated domestic abuse where it wasn't there before, because the stress of it, God knows, you know. And of course, there's a kind of impunity for an abuser because neighbours may not be rushing round to neighbours quite so much when there's a disease, you know, that you might die if you go and sort of have a confrontation with your neighbour. So the last 10 months have intensified what's in the film. And this is a little bit off the point, but I'm sure you'll appreciate why I'm raising it. You know, every filmmaker wants their movie in the movie theatre, in the cinema. And of course, before the pandemic, we were very much, oh no, this is a film about community. It has to be watched as a community, in a community. And now we're thinking, my God, you know, there are these people who are behind closed doors. And one of the things I loved about the screenplay when I first read it was Claire is speaking not just to those of us who feel safe in our homes, but actually to women in this situation. She's sending a message. So I just began to think, no, let's get this message. It's a bit like we're sending a letter through the letterbox. Let's get it through the letterbox, onto the laptop, onto the television, onto the devices. It doesn't matter how, because, you know, I don't know that a movie can save somebody's life, but it definitely can make them feel there's somebody out there who's hearing you, who is listening, will be there listening when you step out of your situation. We are consciously addressing people in this situation. And when we showed the film at Sundance, people stood up in the audience at the end and said, that's my story. I was one of those children. You know, I left my husband. You're like, okay, you know, it's like the pandemic, it's everywhere.
At the bottom of the garden, like a fairy house.
Since Sundance, though, herself has been getting a little Oscar buzz here and a little Oscar buzz there. Does that bother you, or does that embolden you as a filmmaker?
Gosh, I mean, I'm at the moment, very focused on Claire, because I think that because Claire had a birthmark on her eye, she found it very, very hard to get work on screen. And you know that had she been Brad Pitt with a mark on her eye, she'd have been like, oh my God, that quirky guy with the crazy mark. And she had actually wasn't going to play Sandra originally. She had written the screenplay, she gave it to me, and she thought she'd written a little small role for a sister character. She thought, you know what, it's as much as I can hope for that we actually get this film made, and we'll probably need a name to raise the money and And I was at that time involved with another movie. And then one day I kind of heard someone say, you know what, Claire has written a role for a great leading movie actress. And I was like, yeah, herself, her, not Jennifer Lawrence or whoever. It's Claire's going to do it, and I'm going to direct it, and I will make it a condition of doing it that she has to play the lead. Leading to your question, even when I sat there the night before the Oscars and Meryl Streep said to me, if I win the Oscar, it probably won't be for my acting. You know, it's never really about the thing, it's always about another thing. So I think one takes all of this with a pinch of salt, but what I'm happy for Claire is that she's gone from nobody's ever heard of her, and now the world's going to see her. So that's the best bit about this moment.
John, please, we need this job.
What are we doing, Sandra? Do you think this is good for the girls? I'm saying it, counsellor. We could try and make it work.
Meryl Streep is incredible. Going back to your previous work, Mamma Mia takes place on an island where matriarchs and elderly women make their own rules. There is no one to judge them because it's their kingdom. The Iron Lady is in a very real world where this woman, still played by her own rules, but constantly, continuously judged by the world around her. Herself, as far as your work in cinema goes, feels the most real because it's the most approachable story. It's the most relatable story. You might not relate to Margaret Thatcher. You might not agree with Margaret Thatcher. Phyllida, on that note, do you sometimes treat your work as a kind of activism because you're telling so many stories of so many women?
unconscious activism in a way. I was looking back today to think, where did the sort of determination to get more diversity into the work, which I was sort of, that was happening in, even to me, in the 1980s, where I was trying to have not just white people in productions, even though I was often working in towns where people had only ever seen white people virtually. And where did this come from? So at the beginning, it was just an unconscious instinct to somehow reflect, to be more inclusive. But as it's built, as time has gone on, I have become more and more possessed with who owns our culture, who represents it on stage and screen, who gets the gigs, about women's stories and all of the unheard stories. And I do think, you know, people say a lot, oh, could this have been directed by a man? Could that have been directed by a man? You know, it's not really about that. It's about just whether you are curious about, you know, lifting that veil and going, you know, I'm interested in poking my nose in here. It's not that the guys think it's not an interesting story. They've just walked past and they haven't noticed, and they aren't as perhaps as interested in us as us in these details. We like the little miscellaneous fragments of life. Am I an activist? Yes, totally. And everything, you know, is about inclusivity, diversity, and yeah, strong representation of women.
Is that a yes?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, now, get back to work. Good woman.
I have been told that I have 2 more minutes left, so I'm going to hit just my final question. The next t-shirt, by the way, and the next sweatshirt that I'm going to print will have "Ask Better Questions" written on it.
That's great.
Because that line applies everywhere. As a journalist, it applies to me. As filmmakers, it applies to filmmakers, you know, everywhere. Specifically in that moment, I'm just going to ask you a final question about that scene.
And yet you still bring me in here and you ask me questions like, why didn't you leave him? But you never ask, why didn't he stop?
Women often get the unfortunate tag of being melodramatic because we have to repeat ourselves 10 times because the first 9 times no one heard. And the 10th time when you have an outburst, people are like, stop being so melodramatic. So when you're making that scene in the family court, when this line comes, ask better questions, were you thinking how to not make this melodramatic and how to continue to make this feel real?
It's so interesting because the actual procedure of the family court is so not Hollywood. It's like almost like watching, as we say in England, watching paint dry. It's so sort of dull and lacking in kind of drama. But you're conscious that the scene comes at that, as you would say on Broadway, 11 o'clock number moment. It comes at that climax of, you know, the 4th act, and it's got in it this hugely climactic question. You know, you're asking me why I didn't leave, or you never ask why didn't he stop. So you're balancing your desire for complete truth, complete authenticity, with your sense of the kind of symphony that this film is, in which it has to in some way escalate to that moment. And neither Claire or I were totally confident that we got it entirely, that we'd landed the scene. We wondered whether we'd gone far enough. We wondered whether and we were pleased to find that it seemed, you know, she was able, I think the point is that she is not acting this. She is literally bearing witness for all the generations of women she sees in her country who have suffered in this way. So in some ways she's sort of shedding skins in every scene. So on that level, I was confident that however extreme the emotion, it wouldn't be over the top. It would come from her guts. We knew that from the family courts and people working in this field in women's aid had said to us that even the most muted, gaslit, sort of pusillanimous, quiet, beaten down woman, when the court threatens to take her children, will turn into a kind of ravening tiger at the thought that the children are going to be lost. So don't be afraid of having that massive, yes, melodramatic outburst. It's a bit of a long answer.
No, but thank you so much for candidly sharing what you really felt. And I really appreciate your time. I can't wait for the world to watch your film. Thank you for your time today, Phyllida.
Lovely to meet you. And don't forget to send the link about the sweatshirts.
I will. Thank you. Have a great day.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Accent आ जाता है अपने आप, मुझे पता नहीं चलता कहाँ से. But anyway, we are back to being me now. Subscribe to the channel if you liked what you saw. There's so much more I've got lined up. So much. Happy New Year.